Episode 1. He was still warm when I got there. I need you to understand something before I tell you anything else. I need you to understand it the way you understand your own heartbeat. Not because you think about it, but because it is simply there, simply true, so present it doesn't require your attention until the moment it stops. I did not kill Roy Carver. I want that on the record. I want that said plainly, without hedging, without the qualifications that are already lining up inside me like passengers who know they'll be called. I did not kill him. Whatever happened to Roy Carver in that garage on the night of October 14th, 3 years ago, I was not the cause of it. I want to be clear about that. I am going to insist on that even as I tell you the rest, especially as I tell you the rest. The rest being, I moved him. Not far. 11 minutes by car. No traffic at that hour. The roads empty and black and glistening from a rain that had stopped 2 hours before. I moved him from one place to another. I put him somewhere specific, somewhere I chose deliberately, somewhere that made sense to me at the time, for reasons I am going to explain to you very carefully. And then I drove away. And then Thomas Weld spent 4 years in Haverford Correctional before anyone from the outside world cared enough to look again. 4 years. That's what I'm telling you. That is the shape of what I did and did not do. And I know that doesn't sound like a distinction anymore, the doing and the not doing. I know those categories have a way of collapsing when you say them in the same breath. But I need you to hold them apart for a little while. I need you to let me show you the seam between them, because I have been living in that seam for 3 years, and it is not nothing. It is not a comfortable place to live, but it is a real place, a place with geography and weather and its own kind of logic. Thomas Weld was released 14 days ago. I know this because I have been watching for it. I have a Google alert set for his name, and I have had it set for 4 years, since the conviction, since I read the verdict in a local news article while sitting in my car in the parking structure at Linden General, still in my scrubs, eating a sandwich I couldn't taste. I set the alert because I needed to know, because knowing is the only thing I could give him from where I was standing. I couldn't testify. I couldn't come forward, but I could know. I told myself that mattered. I told myself a lot of things. He's out. And 11 days ago, someone put an envelope under the door of my apartment. Not in the mailbox. Under the door. Which means they were in the building, which means they either have a key, or someone let them in, or they waited. The envelope had my name on it in block letters, no return address. And inside it was a single photograph. It was a photograph of a section of road. Route 9, about 1.5 miles past the Kessler Industrial Park. You would not know that road to look at it. Nothing distinctive about it, just asphalt and the dead grass of the shoulder and the dark outline of trees against whatever light was left in that sky. But I knew that road. Of course I knew that road. I drove on it that night. I drove on it slowly, with Roy Carver folded into the back seat of my car, one arm wedged against the door, his feet touching the passenger seat headrest because I had not been thinking clearly about the geometry of it, and by the time I realized he was too long for the position I'd tried, I was already moving, and I didn't want to stop again, didn't want to be still again on that road outside Eli's house, with my trunk open and my phone turned face down on the passenger seat. The photograph arrived, and I stood in my hallway for a long time holding it. Then I put it in the drawer under my sink, underneath the spare toilet paper rolls, and a box of ibuprofen and a ponytail elastic I don't remember buying, and I went to work. I have been a nurse for 19 years, critical care. Before that, 2 years in the ER at St. Agatha's, which was where I learned that the body is not sentimental. The body is mechanical, and it will tell you what it needs if you know how to read it. I learned to read it early. I learned to be fast, and I learned to be accurate, and I learned to make decisions under conditions that would paralyze most people. And I am not telling you this to make myself sound capable. I am telling you this because it matters. It matters for why I did what I did. It matters for what I thought I was doing that night when I pulled into Eli's driveway and saw the light on in the garage. I am not a woman who panics. That is a fact about me. It is not a boast. It is almost a clinical observation. I have been in rooms where someone was dying, and I was the only one in the room who understood what dying looked like. And in those rooms, I do not shake, and I do not raise my voice, and I do not freeze. I move. I calculate. I prioritize. I did all of those things that night. I just prioritized in the wrong order. Or I'm doing it already. I'm retreating into that. Let me try again. I made choices that night that I understood to be choices at the time. I made them deliberately. I made them with the full weight of what I am, the training, the steadiness, the particular kind of thinking I have spent 2 decades building, and I made them wrong. Not wrong in the sense of miscalculation, wrong in the moral sense. I can say that now. It took me a long time to be able to say it without the automatic bracketing that comes after it, the but, the however, the context that makes the wrongness understandable. I can say it now without the brackets. I made a moral error. I made it for reasons I still believe in, partly. I made it for reasons I still lie awake at 3 a.m., turning over, smoothing down, trying to find the right way to hold so they don't cut. And I am going to tell you all of those reasons, every single one of them, because you deserve that, because you came here, wherever here is for you, and you decided to listen, and that makes you a party to this in some small way, and I am not in a position to be careless with parties. Thomas Weld is out. There's an envelope in the drawer under my sink, and I have been awake since 4 a.m. deciding to tell someone. You're who I have. Eli called me at 11:43 on a Wednesday night. I know this because my phone keeps the call log, and I have looked at it so many times in the last 3 years that I have memorized the timestamp the way you memorize a face you're afraid of. October 14th, 11:43 p.m. Duration 47 seconds. He said 4 things in those 47 seconds. He said, Helen, it's me. He said, I need you to come. He said, don't call anyone. Just come. And then, after a pause that I can still feel in the center of my chest, a pause that lasted maybe 3 seconds that felt like 3 minutes, that I have since diagnosed as the sound of someone deciding how much to say and settling on not enough, he said, it's bad. That was it. That was all of it. 47 seconds. I was already reaching for my keys. That is the thing I want you to understand about Eli and me, about the specific architecture of what we are to each other. You cannot understand what I did without understanding that, and I cannot explain it quickly. I cannot reduce it to a sentence. I cannot hand it to you and have it mean anything. You have to let me build it for you. Eli is my brother, my younger brother by 6 years. He is 41 now. He was 38 when this happened. We grew up in Clearwater, Pennsylvania, which is a place you have never been and would not go to unless you grew up there. And even then you'd find a reason not to go back. A small city that has been in the process of becoming something smaller for as long as I have known it. Our father worked at the Clearwater Metalworks until it closed, and then he worked at other places in the same stooped, incremental way, and our mother was a woman of enormous capability and zero outlet who made the house the most orderly place I have ever lived in, and made that order into a kind of punishment none of us could name. There was no violence in our house. I want to say that clearly. Not the kind with fists, anyway, but there are other kinds, aren't there? There are the quieter kinds that leave different marks, the kinds where you grow up believing that safety is conditional, that love is a ration, that the wrong word at the wrong moment will change the temperature of every room in the house, and the change will be your fault. You grow up with a certain hyper-vigilance in those houses. You grow up watching doorways. You grow up reading faces. Eli grew up slower than me in some ways. He felt things longer. He couldn't metabolize disappointment the way I could, couldn't process it and set it down and move forward. Things stuck to him. Injustices stuck to him particularly. He had this sense of, it was like a tuning fork he carried everywhere, calibrated to fairness, and when anything resonated wrong against that frequency, he'd vibrate with it. For days sometimes, for weeks. He got in fights in school. Not many, but the ones he got into were serious. Not petty scuffles serious. The kind of serious where someone needs to explain to a vice principal's office how the other boy ended up with 3 cracked ribs. He was 16, the other boy was 17, and had been making life very difficult for a kid in Eli's year. A quiet kid, a kid who couldn't look after himself. Eli decided to look after him. That is the thing I need you to hold on to. The person Eli hurt, he hurt on behalf of someone else. He was not a predator. He was not a bully. He was a 17-year-old who had decided that the world's unfairness was a problem he was personally responsible for solving, and who had not yet acquired any tools for solving it that didn't involve his hands. It's still the kind of story that makes me want to defend him when I'm telling it. 3 cracked ribs. I know. I am the person who took him to the hospital the year before that, when his wrist was broken in a way that our parents chose not to examine too closely. I am the person who explained to him at 14 in the kitchen, while our parents were asleep, how to wrap his ribs when they're bruised so they don't hurt as much. I am the person who sat next to him in the car outside a counselor's office at 19 and helped him decide to go in. I am the person he called on a Wednesday night 3 years ago at 11:43. He called me first, not a friend, not his wife. He wasn't married then. He had broken up with someone 6 months before and had been living alone. Not the police, not an ambulance, me. And I know what that looks like. I know that to some of you it looks like a pattern. I know some of you are already building a file folder in your mind, labeled enabling, and slotting these pieces into it one by one. I am not going to argue with that folder. I am just asking you to remember that the folder only contains the pieces I am giving you, and I am giving them to you in an order that serves my story, rather than the objective sequence, because I cannot help that. This is how memory works when you're the one who made the choices. I drove to Eli's house in 11 minutes. It is usually a 15-minute drive. I drove faster than I normally drive. When I pulled into his driveway, the garage door was open and there was a single work light on inside, that brutal yellow-white kind, the kind on an extension cord that gives everything the quality of an interrogation. I saw Eli first. He was standing near the wall of shelves where he keeps his tools, standing with his back to me, and he was very still in a way that did not look voluntary. And then I saw Roy Carver on the floor. I should tell you about Roy. I should tell you who he was before he was a body on a concrete floor, because if I skip that part, I am skipping everything that matters. He was not nothing. He was not a prop in someone else's story. He was a man, and I say that with all the complexity it deserves. Roy Carver was 53 years old. He had been in Clearwater County his whole life, except for a year in his 20s, when he'd tried to move to Pittsburgh for work and come back 6 months later, which was a fact about him that I knew, because Clearwater County is the kind of place where you know that fact about people. He had a contracting business, Carver General Contracting, and he was good at his work in the practical sense, in the sense that the things he built stayed up and the work was done on time, and the estimates were usually close to what you actually paid. I know this because he'd done work on my parents' house when I was in my 20s, added a bedroom, replaced the back deck. My father liked him, said he was straight. He had 2 kids, twins, boy and girl, from a first marriage. They would have been about 22, 23 when this happened. I don't know them well. I know their faces the way you know the faces of people from a small place. A recognition that doesn't extend to knowledge. He was married to Dana Carver, née Schultz, for 12 years at the point this happened. Dana taught 4th grade at Millbrook Elementary. She has a particular quality of stillness about her that I always read as strength, but which I have since revised, in the way you revise things when you know more. She's a small woman, compact, the kind of person who takes up exactly the space they occupy, and not 1 inch more, and you don't notice until you're alone with them how much energy that costs. Roy and Dana had a house on Alderman Road, 3 miles from Eli's house, and they had problems. The kind of problems that everyone around them had been watching accumulate for a while, the way you watch a damp patch on a ceiling spread slow and silent until it's no longer just a stain but something structural. I knew about some of those problems because Dana was close to a woman named Carrie Shaughnessy, who is my closest friend, who is the person I have not been able to look directly in the eyes for 3 years. Carrie and Dana had been friends since high school. Carrie told me things, sometimes, in the loose and trusting way that women tell their close friends about their other close friends' marriages. She told me things that I filed away in the professional compartment of my mind, the compartment that knows the clinical language for what she was describing, that has a checklist for it, that knows the difference between a couple going through a rough year and something more systematic than that. I am not going to tell you everything I knew about Roy and Dana's marriage. Not yet. What I will tell you is that Roy Carver and my brother Eli had known each other casually for years. The small city web of connection, the way everyone knows everyone in overlapping and slightly uncomfortable ways. They had worked on a project together once, a commercial build, a restaurant renovation that I remember Eli mentioning because he was annoyed about a scheduling conflict. I don't think they were close. I don't think they particularly liked each other. They were in each other's orbit in the way that men of a certain type and a certain background end up in each other's orbit in a county this size. And on October 14th, Roy Carver was on the floor of Eli's garage, and Eli was standing with his back to me, like a man who had decided that if he didn't turn around, none of it would be real. I said his name, just once. Just. Eli. He turned. His face, I had seen Eli's face in some extremes. I had seen it white with pain. I had seen it red with anger. I had seen it empty with the particular emptiness of grief. The night our father died, 5 years before this, I had not seen it like it was that night. It was a face that had been evacuated, like everything behind his eyes had retreated to some inner room and locked the door. He said, "I don't know what happened." I said, "Move back," because the nurse does not ask what happened first. The nurse assesses first. The nurse goes to the person on the floor and looks. Roy was on his back, slightly to his left side, one arm flung out at an angle. He was dressed in work clothes, jeans, a plaid flannel, work boots that were scuffed in the particular way of someone who uses them for actual work. He had been hit, that was immediately apparent. There was blood from a cut above his right eyebrow, the kind of clean, thin cut that comes from impact rather than a blade. His face was swelling on the right side, that fast underwater swelling of bruised tissue filling with fluid. I knelt next to him. He was breathing. That's what I want you to understand. He was breathing. His chest was moving. I put 2 fingers to his neck and his pulse was there. Too fast and slightly weak, the signature of a body managing something, but present and functional. I did a rapid assessment in the way I've done thousands of times. Pupils unequal, one dilated more than the other, which means head injury, which means pressure on the brain is already a question. I felt along his skull, Without moving him, he flinched. He made a sound that was not quite a word, not quite a groan, somewhere in between, the sound of a brain that is still running but running on backup power. Eli said, "Helen, what do I do?" Not a question, a statement, as though the doing was already decided and I was the one who knew the form it would take. I said, "Stop talking and let me think." What I was thinking, I want to give you this precisely because it matters. What I was thinking was, he needs neurosurgery. He needs it now. He needs a CT scan and an intracranial pressure monitor and a surgical team, and he needs them in the next. The window was already narrowing, was already the kind of window that you race against in critical care. The window where every minute of delay is a calculation of damage, of death, of the difference between recovery and permanent. I was thinking that. I was also thinking about Eli. I am telling you that because it is true. I am not going to pretend the two thoughts were sequential. They were simultaneous. They were happening in the same instant, in the same mind, and I was running the calculations on both of them at the same speed. If I called 911, Roy Carver would have the best possible chance. It would not be a good chance. The injury was already significant, the timeline was already tight, but it would be the best possible chance. And Eli would what? What would happen to Eli? I didn't know yet what had happened. I still don't know, not with certainty, not in the way that would hold up, not in the way that would satisfy you or me or anyone who needs the thing to be clean. What I knew, looking at that garage, was Roy Carver was on the floor with a head injury, and my brother was the only other person there, and Eli had a history of violence, and the cut above Roy's eyebrow was consistent with impact against the corner of the steel tool shelf that was 3 feet from where he was lying. That's what I knew. That is a very particular kind of knowing. It is the kind that points in one direction and doesn't require you to confirm the pointing. It is the kind of knowing that juries find very compelling. I stood up. Eli was looking at me. His hands were at his sides, and he was looking at me with the face of someone who has run out of everything except the capacity to wait. I said, "How long has he been down?" He said, "Maybe 20 minutes, maybe a little more." I didn't know if I didn't want to move him. 20 minutes. You understand what 20 minutes means with a head injury like that? You understand that the window was already much smaller than I wanted it to be. I said, "Did you call anyone else?" He said, "No, just you." I said, "Is there anyone else who knows he was here tonight?" Eli looked at me for a moment that I will not be able to characterize for you accurately. I don't have language for what his face was doing in that moment. I will say only that it was the face of someone understanding for the first time which specific kind of conversation they were in. He said, "I don't think so." And I said, "You need to go inside." He said, "Helen." I said, "Go inside, Eli. Go inside and stay inside. Don't come out until I come and get you." He went. I stood alone in the garage with Roy Carver, who was still breathing, and I made a decision. I want to be very clear about what it was and what it wasn't. It was not a decision to let him die. It was not a decision to abandon him. It was not, "I need you to believe this, even though I understand why believing it is difficult." It was not a cold-blooded calculation. It was a decision made by someone who knew, with medical certainty, that she could not provide what he needed, and who was making the fastest possible assessment of the next best option available. I told myself that getting him to a road, a visible road, a road where someone would find him, was giving him a chance. I told myself that the time I spent in a 911 call, in waiting for paramedics to reach an unmarked address in a semi-rural area at midnight, in the minutes of confusion as they navigated Eli's property, I told myself that time was not nothing. That Route 9, where the early morning truckers came through, was not nothing. I told myself he had a chance. I believe some part of that. I still believe some part of that, and the part I believe is the part that makes everything else possible, the part I return to when everything else becomes too heavy to hold. But I also know, I have always known, that the chance I gave him was not the best chance. The best chance was the phone in my pocket. The best chance had a number. I carried Roy Carver to my car alone. He was a large man, 6 feet, probably 200 pounds. I am 5'7", and I have been in good physical condition since my 20s. Nursing does that to you, the lifting, the standing, the constant low-grade physical demand of it. But I am telling you it was not easy. It was one of the hardest physical things I have done in my life, and I have been doing hard physical things for 19 years. I moved him by increments, supporting his head, trying to minimize the motion while knowing that the act of moving him was itself a motion, was itself already a risk, was already something I would not do to a patient in a hospital under any circumstances. His eyes opened briefly as I was getting him to the car. They opened and he looked at me, or looked in my direction. I cannot be certain he registered me, cannot be certain what he saw was a person rather than light. And he made a sound that was almost a word. I think it was a word. I have spent 3 years trying to decide what that word was, and I am no closer to knowing. Then he closed his eyes again. I drove slowly, more slowly than I had driven to Eli's. Slowly enough that anyone seeing me from a distance would not have perceived urgency. Slowly enough to minimize the movement in the back seat. Slowly enough to give his brain whatever I could still give it. I drove 11 minutes to the stretch of Route 9 near the Kessler Industrial Park, where the shoulder is wide enough that a car can stop, where the sight lines are clear enough in both directions that a trucker would see him, where there is a reflective mile marker post that would serve as a landmark for emergency services. I pulled over. I moved him out of the car, more carefully this time, the increments even smaller, and I positioned him on his back on the shoulder, his head slightly elevated on the gravel of the embankment, his body arranged so that he was visible, so that no one could possibly miss him at 60 miles an hour. Then I stood there for a moment that I cannot fully account for. I don't know what I was doing in that moment. Checking him, maybe, looking at his face, saying something, possibly. I have no memory of words, but I have a sense of the shape of them, the compressed quality of something that needs to be said in very little time. Then I got in my car, and then I drove away. Roy Carver was found by a trucker named Dale Pinkett at 1:17 a.m. I know this from the news reports. He was transported by ambulance to County General. He was in surgery before 2 a.m. He died on the table at 4:44 a.m. from a subdural hematoma, bleeding between the brain and the skull, the kind that expands and compresses until there is nothing left to compress. The medical examiner's report determined that the time of death was consistent with an injury sustained between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., and that the location of discovery was potentially not the primary scene, potentially. That word did a lot of work in the weeks that followed. The investigation found Roy's truck at the Kessler Industrial Park, a mile from where he was found. His keys were on the ground near the driver's side door. The working theory, which became the prosecutorial theory, was that he had been assaulted in the parking area, had walked or been dragged toward Route 9 in a dazed state, and had collapsed on the shoulder. Thomas Weld had been at the Kessler Industrial Park that night. He had a storage unit there. His truck was caught on the security camera at 10:47 p.m., and he and Roy Carver had a dispute, a publicly witnessed dispute, at the Anchor Diner 6 days before Roy's death, about a property boundary, about a fence line, about the particular kind of white-hot Clearwater County grievance that gets into a man's blood and doesn't come out. Thomas Weld was indicted 4 months after Roy died. He was convicted 17 months after that. The evidence against him was circumstantial, but it accumulated with that terrible, tidal, relentless accumulation of circumstantial evidence, the kind that each piece alone would not convict, and that together became something very difficult to argue against. His lawyer argued misidentification of the primary scene. His lawyer argued the MEs potentially like it was a lifeline because it was the only opening. It wasn't enough. Thomas Weld was sentenced to 12 years. He served 4 before a post-conviction review, not of the facts, but of a procedural matter I don't fully understand, something about discovery materials that should have been shared and weren't, led to his release. He is out now. He is somewhere in Clearwater County, and someone put a photograph under my door. Episode 2. The Way a Nurse Counts. I have counted things for 19 years. This is what nursing actually is, underneath all the meaning people assign to it, the caring, the vocation, the particular quality of selflessness they imagine when they imagine someone like me. Underneath all of that, counting, heart rate, respiration, oxygen saturation, fluid input and output, the numbers on a monitor that tell you not what someone is feeling, but what they are doing, what their body is doing in the measurable, objective language of physiology. I was good at it from the beginning. I was better at it than at the other parts, the ones that require you to sit at the bedside and hold someone's hand and be present in a soft, porous way, available to their fear. I could do those things. I can do them now. But they cost me more than the counting does. The counting is effortless. The counting feels like coming home. After Roy died, I counted differently. I counted the days between the incident and the investigation. I counted the columns of newspaper text about the case. I counted the number of times Eli's name did not appear in any of them, and each time it didn't appear, I would take one slow breath and add it to a column in my head that I labeled intact, as though I were monitoring a vital sign. Intact, intact, intact. 47 days after Roy's death, a detective named Ray Solis came to the hospital and asked to speak with me. This was not specific to me. He was interviewing people who had known Roy, building what I later understood was the evidential map of Roy's social world in the weeks before his death. He was thorough, and he was pleasant in the bland, economical way of someone who has learned that pleasantness is a useful tool, not a posture. We sat in a family consultation room, because that was what was available, one of those rooms decorated to suggest comfort and delivering only the suggestion, the neutral art on the walls, the slightly too soft chairs, the box of tissues on the end table that is always there and almost never used by the people who are supposed to need it. Detective Solis had a notebook and he used it, but not continuously. He would write something and then set the pen down and look at me in a way that was designed to feel companionable, to feel like the notebook was an afterthought. He asked me if I knew Roy Carver. I said I did, in a general way, the way you know people in Clearwater County. He asked if I'd seen Roy recently. I said not for some time. I said I had seen him at a gas station, I thought, a few months back. We'd said hello. I don't know if this was true. I invented it as I said it, or maybe I remembered it. There is a region of that timeline in my memory where the real and the invented have become difficult to separate because I have rehearsed both so many times. He asked if I knew of any conflict Roy had been involved in, any disputes, anyone who was angry at him. I said I didn't, really. I said I'd heard about the fence business with Thomas Weld, which everyone in the county had heard about, which I could mention without it meaning anything. He wrote something. He asked if I had been at home on the night of October 14th. I said yes. I said I'd worked a day shift and come home around 7 and gone to bed early because I had an early shift the next morning. He nodded. He wrote something. He said, Is there anyone who can confirm that? And here is the thing about that question. That question, asked in that pleasant, blank, conversational way, was the question. It was the question everything was balanced on, because I lived alone. Because the call from Eli at 11:43 was in my phone. Because my car had been on Route 9. Because in the particular arithmetic of this situation, everything depended on what happened in the next 10 seconds of my life. I said I live alone. I wouldn't have anyone to confirm it. I said it the way you say a plain fact. I said it without the flinch. He nodded again. He wrote something. He thanked me for my time. I walked him to the elevator and watched the doors close, and then I went to the supply room. A room I have the code to, a room that smells of antiseptic and sealed packaging, a room where I have ducked more than once over the years when the floor got too loud, and I stood in it for 5 minutes. My hands were completely steady. That is the part that still unsettles me when I think about it. I want to tell you they were shaking. I want to tell you there was some physical evidence of what was happening inside me, some somatic protest, some signal from my body that it knew what my mouth was doing was wrong. But there was nothing. My hands were steady, my breathing was controlled. My pulse, had anyone measured it, would have been unremarkable. The nurse does not panic. The nurse counts. Intact, I added. Intact. Eli and I did not speak about that night for 11 weeks after it happened. Not directly. Not in the way I am speaking about it now. We talked, we saw each other, we had the ordinary traffic of a family that has always run on practicality rather than expression. The phone calls about our mother's health, the texts about the holidays. We existed in each other's lives in all the ways we always had. But the specific geography of October 14th was, we moved around it. We knew it was there, we knew exactly where it was. But we did not walk toward it. I did this deliberately. I believe he did too. There are things you know about a silence before you break it, and one of the things you know is that breaking it changes it permanently. You cannot unknow a conversation. Once something is spoken aloud between two people, it exists in a different register than when it exists only in the mind of each of them separately. I needed the separateness for a while. I needed the version where what we knew was still technically provisional, still technically without shape, because once we gave it a shape together, we would both have to live with that shape. 11 weeks. Then Eli called me on a Tuesday afternoon in early January, and he said, I need to see you. Not at your place or mine. Can we go somewhere? We met at a rest stop off Route 23. This is a thing I recognized even as we were doing it. The specific, practical intelligence of meeting at a place that is between places, a place with no associations, a place that can be explained if it has to be explained. It was a bright, cold January afternoon, the kind of cold that makes everything specific. We sat in his truck with the heater running, and he looked straight ahead at the parking lot for a moment, and then he said, They arrested someone. I said, I know. He said, Thomas Weld. I said, I know. He said, Helen, and I said, don't. The word came out harder than I meant it to, or exactly as hard as I meant it. I am not sure which. I said, whatever you're about to say, don't say it yet. Let me say something first. He waited. I said, I need you to understand something. I need you to understand that what I did that night, I did for reasons I believed in. I still believe in most of them, but I need you to also understand that I cannot undo it. I cannot go back. I cannot re-enter this situation without destroying everything I did, and I am not going to do that. Are you hearing me? He said, He didn't do anything, Helen. I said, You don't know that. He looked at me then. He looked at me in a way that I have not been looked at many times in my life, not with anger, not with accusation exactly, but with the particular quality of someone who is watching you say a thing they cannot believe you are saying. He said, I know Thomas well didn't do anything because I know who was in that garage that night. Silence. Then, tell me what happened. Eli told me. He told me in the flat, stripped-down way of someone who has been holding a thing for 11 weeks and has removed everything from it except the facts, because the facts are the only part that doesn't hurt on contact. He told me what had happened between him and Roy in the garage. He told me why Roy had come to his house that night. He told me what the argument was about and how it escalated and what happened at the end of it. I am not going to tell you all of that yet. I am going to tell you some of it, and the rest later when we've gotten to the part of the story where it belongs, because the story of what happened in that garage is not a story that can be told efficiently. It requires everything that came before it to be visible first. What I will tell you is this. After Eli told me, I sat in his truck in the rest stop parking lot for a long time without speaking. And when I finally spoke, I said something that I am not proud of. I said something that I have turned over so many times in the last 3 years that the shape of it has become unfamiliar, like a word you say too many times until it stops sounding like a word. I said, that doesn't change anything. He said, an innocent man is going to prison. I said, we don't know he's innocent. And Eli looked at me again with that look, and he said, quietly, so quietly, the heater running between us, the winter light flat and even on the windshield. He said, I do. I need to tell you about the night Roy came to Eli's house. But I need to tell you about Donna Carver first. Not the Donna Carver of the trial, the wife, the bereaved, the still woman in the gallery who wore the same dark gray coat every day, as though she had decided once what grief should look like and would not be persuaded to revise it. The Donna, but the Donna of the years before, the Donna that Carrie Shaughnessy told me about in the gradual accumulation of a decade of friendship, the Donna that exists in the parts of the story that never made it into a courtroom. Carrie has been my closest friend since nursing school. We graduated the same year. We worked the same floor for 6 years before her life moved to a different part of the county, and we became the kind of friends who see each other less than they should and feel worse about it than they let on. She is a person of great warmth and what I can only describe as moral generosity. She gives people the benefit of the doubt, not naively but deliberately, as an act of sustained goodwill. She chose to be friends with Donna Carver at a time when Donna was not an easy person to choose. Donna was guarded, and Donna was particular, and Donna had a way of withdrawing trust that you had already been given without alerting you to the withdrawal, so you'd go on talking to her as though you still had what you'd had until some small incident revealed that it was gone. But Carrie saw something in Dana that she held on to. I trusted that. I still trust it. Carrie is the kind of woman whose judgment about people I have never had reason to revise. Over the years, Carrie told me things, not all at once, not as a single disclosure, but in the way information moves between people who trust each other and who are watching someone they love exist in a situation they have no power to fix. She told me about the way Roy spoke to Donna at home. She told me about the way he managed the money in a manner that left Donna consistently uncertain about what she had access to and why. She told me about one incident, one specific incident, that Carrie lowered her voice to tell me that she prefaced with, "You cannot say a word about this," where Donna had shown up at Carrie's house on a night that Roy thought Donna was working late, and Donna had a bruise on her upper arm that she said was from bumping into a door frame, and Carrie had believed her for approximately 30 seconds before understanding that she didn't believe her at all. One incident, one that Carrie knew about. I am a nurse in a critical care unit. I know the math of one incident I know about. I am telling you this because you need to understand the full picture before you decide what to do with Eli's phone call. You need to understand what Roy Carver was, the full accounting of him, before you decide whether Eli's reasons for being angry at him that night were reasonable. The full accounting includes the Carver General Contracting truck, and the restaurant renovations done on schedule, and the twins' college funds, and the way he sometimes told a genuinely funny joke at a party, and made everyone feel included in it. The full accounting also includes what Dana's arm looked like that night. Both. All of it. I have never told Carrie what I know about that night. About any of it. She lost a friend. She lost Dana in the particular way you lose people to grief, not cleanly, not quickly, but in the slow withdrawal that follows great loss, the way someone pulls inward, and the radius of who they will let close gets smaller and smaller. She still texts Dana on Dana's birthday. Dana sometimes responds. Carrie has never said anything to me that suggests she suspects anything, and I have never given her reason to, and I never will, and the gap between those two truths is one of the specific weights I carry. Episode 3. What Eli Said When I Arrived. Eli called me at 11:43, and I drove to his house in 11 minutes, and I found Roy Carver on the floor of his garage. I have told you that, but I have not told you what Eli said when I arrived. Before I said move back and went to Roy, I arrived, and the garage was open, and Eli was standing at the shelf, and I was crossing the driveway toward the garage. And Eli turned and said, before I had even fully processed what was on the floor, he said, he was hitting her, Helen. That was the first thing he said to me that night. Not I don't know what happened. That came later. The first thing he said was, he was hitting her, Helen. 3 years ago, I chose not to give that sentence the weight it deserved. I folded it and put it in the same drawer where I put everything I couldn't deal with in the moment, and I went to Roy, and I became the nurse, and I did what I did. I am taking it out of the drawer now. He was hitting her, Helen. Here is what Eli told me 11 weeks later in the rest stop parking lot. Roy had been to his house that night because Eli had confronted him, not violently, not yet at that point. Eli had confronted him about Dana, about what Carrie had told me, and presumably told Eli through some circuit of second-hand knowledge I haven't fully mapped, about what Eli himself had witnessed, because it turned out Eli had seen something, had seen it on an evening he'd dropped something at Dana's house that she'd asked to borrow, had seen the quality of the air in that kitchen, had seen the way Dana moved around Roy's vicinity, had seen Roy's hand on the back of Dana's neck in the particular way that is not an embrace. Eli had confronted him, had told Roy, in the way Eli tells people things, that what he was doing needed to stop, that people knew that it would not continue. Roy had come to his house that night to respond to that confrontation. Roy had come to his house to tell him that it was none of his business, that Dana was his wife, that Eli was going to stay out of it, or there would be consequences that Eli would not enjoy. Eli told me that the argument escalated, that there was a point where Roy got close to him, inside the space that most people observe as the space they stay out of when they're not in a physical altercation. That at that point Eli pushed him back, that Roy swung first, and that Eli hit him. Once, he said, hard. Roy's head connected with the steel corner of the shelf. Eli said, I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I didn't mean for him to go down. I believe him. I want to be clear that I believe him, even knowing that I believe him is not the same as it's true, and that the distinction matters enormously in the world as it actually operates. I believe he did not intend for Roy Carver to die. I believe that the specific trajectory of that night was not something Eli chose, that the worst of it was the result of escalation and proximity and bad angles, rather than intent. I believe all of that. And I also believe, I have to believe, because the alternative is a thing I cannot hold, that there is a difference between an accident and innocence, that something can be unintended and still be your responsibility, that Eli's responsibility and Thomas Weld's innocence can both be true simultaneously, and that the presence of one does not dilute the other. Thomas Weld is an innocent man. I have always known that. I have known it since the indictment, since the trial, since the verdict. I have known it with the precise, calibrated certainty of someone who knows something the way they know a diagnosis, not because they want to know it, but because the evidence is undeniable and their training gives them no way to discard evidence that is right in front of them. He is innocent, and he served 4 years, and now he is out. And someone put a photograph under my door. I need to tell you about the person who almost found out. Her name is Renata Youssef. She was the county DA's investigator assigned to the Carver case. She is a small woman, very thin, with a quality of attention about her that I recognized from the first time I met her. I recognized it because I have it myself. That particular narrowing focus that people sometimes mistake for coldness because they don't understand that it is actually a form of respect, the fullest attention you can give to a problem. She interviewed me twice. The first time was early in the investigation, part of the social mapping I described. The second time was 8 months later, 6 weeks before the trial. By that time, I had heard about the medical examiner's report. I had followed the case closely enough to know that the potentially not the primary scene language had attracted some scrutiny, that someone on the defense team had commissioned a forensic analysis of the road conditions, that the question of whether Roy had walked a mile in that condition or been placed where he was found was a question that had not been fully resolved. I had also, by that time, had a dream about Renata Youssef, not a dramatic dream, not one of those vivid, symbolic dreams that announce themselves as meaningful. A very quiet dream in which she was sitting across from me. We were in the family consultation room again, and she said to me in a tone that had no accusation in it at all, as though she were simply noting something, "I know you were on Route 9, and I woke up, and I lay in the dark for a while, and then I went to work." She called me in for the second interview 8 days after that dream. I want you to understand that I know that's a coincidence. I do not traffic in superstition, and I did not then. The timing was a coincidence. But the dream had prepared me for her in a specific way, had let me rehearse, even in sleep, the specific quality of sitting across from this woman, knowing what I knew. The second interview was in her office at the county building. It was late afternoon in August, the light coming through the window at a low angle, turning everything amber. She had a file open on her desk, and she was reading from it, and she did not look up when I sat down, which I recognized as a technique. She asked me, eventually, if I had driven on Route 9 in the week of October 14th. I said I probably had. Yes, Route 9 connects to the main road I use to get to work. It's not unusual for me to be on it. She said, on the 14th specifically? I said I couldn't be certain without checking. She looked at me, not at the file, at me. She said, we have a traffic camera at the Route 23 interchange that picked up a vehicle consistent with your make and model at 12:49 a.m. on October 15th. 12:49. I had been driving back from Route 9. I would have passed the Route 23 interchange at approximately that time. She said, is there anything you'd like to tell me? I would like to tell you that I held her gaze. I would like to tell you that there was no flicker of anything, that the nurse was fully in control, that the counting was steady. But the truth is that for approximately 2 seconds, I had the specific physical experience of the ground opening under me. Not metaphorically, literally the physical sensation of the floor ceasing to be reliable. 2 seconds. Then, I was on Route 9 that night. She waited. I sometimes drive when I can't sleep. It's something I've done for years. I don't have a specific memory of that night, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was my car. She wrote something. She said, "Did you see anything unusual on Route 9 that night?" I said, "I don't remember seeing anything." She said, "Did you stop at any point?" I said, "I may have. Sometimes I pull over if I'm tired. I genuinely don't have a clear memory of that specific drive." She looked at me again with that attention of hers, that precise, unflinching regard. She said, "Okay." That was all she said. "Okay." She wrote something and she looked at the file again and she asked me 2 more questions that were about other things, about Roy's professional reputation, about whether I'd ever seen him in conflict with anyone at community events, and then she thanked me and I left. Okay. I drove home from that interview and I sat in my car in my parking spot. And I sat there for 45 minutes. She knew something, not everything. But she had the camera, and she had a possible make and model, which means she had a partial, and she'd run it through the relevant systems, and my registration had come up as a candidate. She knew enough to bring me back in, and she had looked at me in a way that I could not fully interpret, not the look of someone who is certain, but not the look of someone who is satisfied either. She was not done. But then she was done, as far as I ever knew. The trial moved forward. The forensic evidence about the primary scene was ruled insufficient to exonerate, and the defense's expert was countered by the prosecution's expert, as these things tend to go, and Thomas Weld was convicted, and Renata Youssef, as far as I can tell, did not pursue the camera question further. I do not know why. I have 3 theories and I think about them in rotation. 1. She ran the make and model and the camera resolution was insufficient to make a positive ID and she had nothing actionable. 2. She identified my car and identified me and made a judgment call about how it fit the broader picture, a judgment call that I was a peripheral witness who had perhaps seen something and was too frightened to say so, which did not rise to the level of disrupting a prosecution she believed in. 3. She knows, and she has always known, and she is waiting. I have never been able to eliminate Theory 3. Episode 4. I moved him alone. People use the word moved in a lot of contexts. You are moved by music, you move furniture, you move money between accounts. The word is so elastic, so accommodating, that it can hold almost anything without breaking. I moved Roy Carver. I want to tell you what that actually was, the specific physical and psychological reality of it, because I think I have been using the word as a kind of screen, a way to say the thing without making you see the thing. And I said at the beginning that you deserve the truth, and so the truth. He was on the concrete floor of Eli's garage. He was breathing, but not responsive, not in the sense of being able to follow commands or indicate comprehension. His eyes were closed. His face had the particular slackness of the deeply unconscious, the complete absence of the micro-expressions that animate a face in any other state. He looked, I am going to say this because it is true, he looked like a body. Not in the way I mean when I use that word clinically, in the other way, in the way that tells you the person is still there but very faintly, very far away, barely tethered. I moved him to my car by pulling him, essentially. I got his upper body first, got under his shoulders, and dragged him toward the door. The concrete was not smooth. It was the original poured floor of a 1970s garage, slightly rough, slightly uneven, and it caught on his jeans and his boots. I moved him 3 or 4 feet at a time, resetting my grip. He was very heavy in the specific way of someone who is completely passive, completely without muscular resistance, all of his weight distributed in the unpredictable way of someone who is not helping. I could not maintain proper spinal precautions. I know I could not. I know what that means. I have been in rooms where someone's spine was at risk, and I have run protocols and counted and checked and double-checked, because the difference between moving someone correctly and moving someone incorrectly when there is a spinal injury can be the difference between a person who walks and a person who doesn't. I know all of that with absolute precision. I moved him anyway, not because I thought he didn't have a spinal injury. He might have, from the fall, from hitting the shelf, but because the alternative was to not move him, and the alternative was something I was not capable of choosing. Not that night, not in that garage. I got him to my car. I got him into the back seat. I drove slowly to Route 9, getting him out of the car and onto the shoulder. That was the hardest part. My back, I want to tell you about my back, not for sympathy but for specificity. I have a mild lumbar disc issue, the occupational hazard of nursing, the result of years of lifts and transfers done correctly and a few that weren't. I know the specific geography of my own back's limitations. Getting Roy Carver out of that back seat and positioning him on the shoulder of Route 9 exceeded those limitations. I was in pain for 4 days after that night. Real pain, not soreness. The kind of pain that requires ibuprofen in quantities that are slightly more than recommended. I went to work the next morning, and I stood for 12 hours and moved and lifted and functioned, and I did not tell anyone about the pain, because the pain was not something I could explain without explaining why I had it. I positioned him on his back, on the gravel shoulder, with his head slightly elevated on the slope of the embankment. I straightened his arm, the one that had been at an odd angle during transport. I pulled his jacket closed, because the night was cold, and I was aware, even as I did it, of the absurdity of that gesture, of the particular tender uselessness of keeping warm someone who was past the point where warmth would matter in the way warmth is supposed to matter. I stood. I looked at his face. I want to tell you what I felt. I have been trying to reconstruct it for 3 years, and what I arrive at is something too complex to be a single emotion, something layered in the way that only real experiences are layered. There was a thing I can only call grief. Not the grief of loss exactly, something more anticipatory, something that understood what was coming and was already beginning to respond to it, and underneath that, something that I am ashamed of, something I don't fully want to name, relief, the merest thread of it, not at Roy's condition, God, not at that, but at the fact that what I had done was done, that the moment of decision was behind me, that there was nothing left to choose. I had chosen, I had acted, the sequence was complete. I know what you're thinking about that relief. I thought it too. I still think it. I got in my car and I drove home, and I went to bed, and I lay there until 4:15 a.m., when I got up and showered and went to work. In my clinical notes that day, I was clear, accurate, and complete. My patients had good outcomes. I administered exactly the right medications at exactly the right times. A colleague stopped me in the hallway at lunch and said I looked tired, and I said I wasn't sleeping well, which was true, which gave me a strange satisfaction to say a true thing in a moment when my whole life had become about saying adjacent true things, things that were technically accurate and contextually dishonest. I wasn't sleeping well. Accurate. The specific damage to Roy's brain, as described in the ME report that I obtained through the most impersonal and legal means possible, a public records request because the case was tried and the documents became available, was a subdural hematoma, right-sided, with midline shift of approximately 8 millimeters. This is a significant shift. This is the kind of shift that neurosurgeons see and immediately understand as a race against time. This is the kind of shift that with fastest possible intervention gives you odds, and with any delay gives you significantly worse odds. I have read this report many times. I have read it in the way you read something you are hoping will tell you something different from what it told you before. It never does. There is a question I have been asking myself for 3 years, which is, did he have a chance? Not the chance I gave him, the chance he would have had if I had called 911 from Eli's garage. I cannot answer this with certainty, and I know that. The honest medical assessment is that the injury was severe and that the outcome might have been the same regardless of the timeline. Subdural hematomas of that severity, with that kind of midline shift, have a mortality rate that does not disappear even with optimal care. He might have died on that garage floor while the ambulance was still being dispatched. He might have died in surgery. He might have died at exactly 4:44 a.m., no matter what. Or he might not have. That's the thing about might. Might is not nothing. Might is the whole of it, in a way. Might is the word the rest of my life is written in. There is something I need to tell you about the envelope. I said there was a photograph inside it. A photograph of a stretch of Route 9. That is true, but I have been circling what else was in the envelope, and I think I have been circling it because saying it changes the level of danger I am in, and I have been comfortable, in a terrible way, with the level of danger that existed before I said it. In the envelope, under the photograph, folded into quarters, was a single sheet of paper. On it, in the same block letters as my name on the outside, "I know you were there." 5 words. I stood in my hallway holding it, and I counted the number of people who could know, the number of people who for any reason possessed any piece of this, who had any fragment that, combined with enough other fragments, could produce that sentence with that certainty. Eli knows what I did. Renata Yusuf may know, or some version of it. Dial Pinkett, the trucker who found Roy, knows what he found and where. The traffic camera at the Route 23 interchange captured what it captured, and Thomas Weld is out. Thomas Weld, who spent 4 years in Haverford Correctional for something he did not do, who had 4 years to think about what he did and didn't do and what the gaps were and who was in those gaps. Thomas Weld, who is now back in Clearwater County. Did he see me that night? Was he there? Not at Eli's, I don't mean that. Eli's house is 8 miles from the Kessler Park. But was he on Route 9? Was there a moment, in those minutes between 12:40 and 1:17, when Dale Pinkett arrived? When Thomas Weld was on that road and saw my car, saw the tail lights, saw something? Did he see me, or is it something else entirely? Someone else entirely. Someone I haven't thought of yet, which is perhaps the most frightening possibility of all. Episode 5. Donna Carver's face at the funeral. I went to Roy Carver's funeral. I want to explain why, and I want you to accept the explanation as true, even if it strikes you as strange. I went because not going would have been conspicuous in a way that going wasn't. I went because Carrie was going, and Carrie would have asked questions if I didn't. I went because I am from Clearwater County, and Roy Carver had done work on my parents' house, and that is sufficient reason to attend a funeral in Clearwater County. I went for all of those reasons, and I went because I could not stop myself from going, and I knew that before I decided to go, and the reasons I just gave you are the true reasons and also the reasons I used as cover for the one I can't fully defend. The funeral was at Shepherd's Lutheran, the large one on Millbrook Road, which has a parking lot that fills to overflowing at Christmas and Easter, and the funerals of people who were known. Roy was known. The parking lot was full. I parked on the street and walked in from the cold, the November cold by then, a week after the death, a week after the investigation had begun. Donna Carver was in the front pew. I could see the back of her coat, the dark gray coat, which I didn't know yet would become the only coat she wore for months, and the set of her shoulders. She was seated between one of the twins and Roy's sister, a woman named Bob, who I recognized and did not know well. I sat toward the back. The service was long. I don't remember much of it with precision. Sermons at funerals are not memorable in the way that individual moments are memorable. I remember the hymns. I remember the smell of the heating system in that church, the particular burning dust smell of old radiators coming on for the season. And I remember the moment at the end, at the reception in the church hall, when Dana Carver looked at me. She was making the circuit of the room. This is what you do at funerals. You move through the space as efficiently as you can, receiving condolences, managing the expressions of others' grief, which is a different and more exhausting task than managing your own. She was doing it well. She was doing it in the particular way of someone who is very controlled and who has chosen control over expression for a very specific reason. She came to where I was standing. I said, "Dana, I'm so sorry." She looked at me. She looked at me in a way that I am going to try to describe this as precisely as I can. There was nothing in her face of the social machinery of a funeral. Nothing of the managed gratitude, the received warmth, the brief physical softness of someone accepting a condolence. There was none of that. Her face was a face in which something very specific had been decided. Something had been resolved in her before this moment, and the resolution showed on her face as a kind of stillness that was different from grief stillness. It was clear, it was almost calm. She said, "I know." She said it quietly. Not quietly for the space, the room was loud enough to cover it, but quietly in the sense of precision, as if volume was irrelevant to what she needed to convey. She moved on. She was already turning to the next person, the next condolence, the next managed expression. She moved on, and I stood where I was for a moment longer than I should have. I know. What did she know? What had she meant? I have been turning that over for 3 years. I know may have meant nothing. It may have been a reflexive social acknowledgement, a polite "I know, thank you." People say "I know" at funerals, constantly, in exactly that way. It may have been that, or she may have meant what it says, or she may have been making a different kind of acknowledgement, the acknowledgement of someone who knows what her husband was, who knows that his death arrived inside a web of his own making, who knows and is not entirely without ambivalence about what she knows. That kind of "I know." I have not spoken to Dana Carver directly since that day in the church hall. Carrie tells me she's doing better, that she's still teaching, that she got a dog. These are the pieces I receive. I have a colleague named Lupe Santana, registered nurse, 13 years. We have worked the same floor for 8 of those years, and we are friends in the particular way that co-workers who have seen each other in extremis become friends, not the way Carrie and I are friends, not the deep and complicated geography of a lifelong connection, but something more immediate, more specific to the shared conditions of the work. She has a laugh that comes from the bottom of her ribcage and a directness that most people find abrasive until they've known her long enough to understand it as the deepest form of respect she has to offer. 3 months after Roy died, Lupe said something to me during a shift. We were charting at adjacent workstations, the floor temporarily quiet, the kind of quiet that you don't trust because it doesn't last. She said, not looking up from her screen, "You've been different this year." I said, "Different? How?" She said, "Like you're watching something. Like your eyes go somewhere else, sometimes even when the rest of you is still here." I said, "I'm fine. I'm just tired." She looked at me then, just for a moment. She said, "Okay," and then she went back to her chart. She didn't push. Lupe doesn't push. She says the thing she needs to say, and she leaves room for you to decide what to do with it, and she doesn't require you to do anything in particular. This is one of the things I value most about her. But she saw it. She saw the place in me where something had changed, the place where the ordinary wear of work and life had been joined by a different kind of wear, the constant low-grade erosion of carrying a thing you cannot put down. She saw it, and she named it, and she let me deny it, and she let that be enough. I think about what would have happened if she'd pushed. I don't know. I honestly don't know. And not knowing is its own small terror. Episode 6. The trial I didn't testify at. I attended 3 days of Thomas Weld's trial. I know what that looks like. I know what you're thinking, the guilty presence, the vigil, the murderer returning to the scene, except I am not the murderer, and the trial is not the scene, and yet I understand the shape of the compulsion. I was there because I needed to see it. I needed to see Thomas Weld in person, to understand the dimensions of him, to put a body and a face to the name that I had been living alongside for months. You can read a name in a news article for weeks, and it stays two-dimensional, a symbol, a placeholder. I needed him to be a person. He is a person. He is. I need to tell you what he looked like, because it matters, and because I think you might have been imagining him as one thing, and he is another. He is a man in his late 50s, medium height, the kind of build that suggests a life of physical work done consistently for decades. He has gray in his hair and a face that is unremarkable in the specific way of faces that have spent a lot of time outdoors, weathered even, tanned in a way that has nothing to do with leisure. He wore a suit that was slightly too large for him in the shoulders, in the way of a suit rented or borrowed for a specific occasion, and he sat at the defense table with a stillness that I recognized as the stillness of someone who has been told not to react, who has been prepared, who is performing composure because composure is the only available choice. He looked, sitting there, like someone who was bewildered. Not the performed bewilderment of someone who knows they're guilty and is trying to project innocence. The real bewilderment of someone who cannot fully comprehend the gap between their experience of a night and the story that is being told about it. He had been at the Kessler Park that night. He had a storage unit there. He had been there to drop off some tools. That was his account, and it was consistent with his records. He had legitimate access. He had a legitimate reason to be there. His truck was on the camera. He'd left, as far as he knew, before anything happened. He had no alibi for the period after he left the park, because he'd gone home and gone to bed, and his wife had been in Harrisburg visiting her sister, and there was no one there to confirm the going home and the going to bed. And he'd argued with Roy Carver 6 days before, at the Anchor Diner, about a property line, about a fence that Roy had installed partially on Thomas's property, which was an error that Roy had declined to acknowledge and declined to correct. The argument had been witnessed by several people. It had been characterized, in those witness accounts, as heated, as something more than a dispute about a fence. Thomas Weld's lawyer told me nothing about the man that wasn't already in the trial record, but being in the room told me things. It told me what his breathing looked like. It told me how his hands rested on the table. It told me when he looked at the jury and when he didn't, and what both those choices communicated. He looked at the jury when the witnesses talked about his argument with Roy. He looked at them steadily, not flinching, not performing, just looking, as if he wanted them to see his face while they heard that testimony and make their own assessment. I watched him do that. I sat in the gallery and I watched him do that, and I thought, he knows that this looks bad. He knows that people are drawing conclusions from it, and he is sitting there trusting that if they look at him clearly enough, they will also see that he did not do this. He was right. He was right that if they looked clearly enough, they would see that. But they were looking at the evidence too, and the evidence told a story that was very easy to follow. and a very easy story is very difficult to argue against when the alternative is complexity. The alternative was me. The alternative was Eli. The alternative was the garage and the shelf and the drive on Route 9. The alternative was complexity. And it was sitting in the gallery, watching Thomas Weld put his trust in the clarity of his own face. I sat through 3 days of that trial. I sat through the prosecution's expert on the forensics of primary scenes. I sat through the cross-examination of Dale Pinkett. I sat through the character witnesses who told the jury about Roy Carver's standing in the community, his reputation for fairness, the generic eulogy quality of testimony about the recently dead. I sat through the counter-witnesses who told the jury about Thomas Weld's reputation for directness, for stubbornness on matters of principle, which the prosecution characterized as confirmation of his capacity for violence, and which the defense characterized as the description of an honest man. I sat through all of it. I did not stand up. I want to tell you, I need to tell you, that there was a specific moment during the prosecution's closing argument when the attorney said something that made I felt the muscles in my legs begin to gather, the preparatory muscular tension of someone who is about to stand. I felt it, and I sat very still, and I waited it out, the way you wait out a cramp, riding the edge of it without giving it anywhere to go. He said the evidence places Roy Carver on a road outside the Kessler Industrial Park. The evidence places Thomas Weld on that road. The evidence of their conflict is established and witnessed. The evidence is asking you to put these facts together in the only arrangement that makes sense. The only arrangement that makes sense. I felt my legs gather. I breathed. I sat still. The arrangement that makes sense is not the only arrangement that exists. There is another arrangement. There is an arrangement in which a woman drove 11 minutes down Route 9 with a dying man in her back seat and made a choice she has never been able to fully account for, and then went to work the next morning and charted vital signs and administered medications and did not tell a single person what her hands had done the night before. That arrangement also makes sense. That arrangement is in fact the true one, but I didn't stand. I went home that night, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I tried to eat something, and I couldn't, and I sat there until 11 o'clock, and then I went to bed, and I lay in the dark for a long time listening to the building, the pipes, and the settling of the floors above me, the sounds a building makes when it's doing nothing but existing. I told myself Thomas Weld would be acquitted. I told myself the forensics were insufficient. I told myself the jury would see the gap in the prosecution's story and understand that there was something in the gap. 12 of them sat in that room for 2 days. Guilty. Episode 7. Thomas Weld in the newspaper. When the verdict came in, I was at work. I read it on my phone in the break room during a 15-minute window between a patient transfer and a medication round. A 2-paragraph update in the county online paper. Jury returns guilty verdict in Carver murder trial. Thomas Weld, 58, was convicted Friday of voluntary manslaughter in the death of Roy Carver, 53, of Clearwater County. Manslaughter, not murder. The jury had found manslaughter, which means they did not believe he had planned it, which means on some level they understood that what happened was not premeditated, which means the story they constructed, the parking lot, the confrontation, the blow, was a story in which Thomas Weld was a man pushed to a terrible act by accumulated anger, not a man who went there to kill. They weren't wrong about the story. They just had the wrong man. I put my phone in my pocket. I went back to the floor. I checked on the patient I'd transferred, and I did the medication round, and I spoke with a family who had questions about a prognosis, and I explained the prognosis as clearly and as humanely as I could manage, which I have always believed was a skill of mine. the ability to tell people hard truths in language that doesn't break them. At 7 p.m., I drove home. I stopped at the grocery store on the way, and I bought pasta and jarred sauce and a bottle of wine, and I went home and I made the pasta and I drank most of the wine, and I watched nothing on the television, just sat in front of it while it played, not processing what was on the screen. Around 10 o'clock, I called Eli. He picked up after 2 rings and didn't say anything. I said, "Did you see?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Eli." He said, "I know." We were quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And I am going to give you this as exactly as I can. I've been thinking about going to someone." I said, "No." He said, "Helen." I said, "No. Listen to me. Think about what that means. Think about what you would be walking into. Think about—" He said, "I know what I'd be walking into." I said, "Do you? Do you actually know? Because I don't think you do. Because you'd be walking into a confession of manslaughter. You'd be walking into an obstruction charge for me. You'd be walking into the deconstruction of the last year of your life, of your business, of everything. And you would not be doing it for Thomas Weld. You'd be doing it because you feel bad. And that's not enough. That is not enough." Silence. Then he said, "He didn't do anything." I said, "I know." He said, "He's going to spend years in that place for something I did." I said, "I know." He said, "How do you live with that?" And I said, "And this is the thing I have thought about more than anything else. The thing that has become the sentence I am most afraid of. The sentence I use to define the person I have become since that night. I said, 1 day at a time." I said it without irony. I said it as genuine advice. I said it to my brother who had just watched an innocent man get convicted of a crime that occurred as a consequence of something my brother did, and I said it to him as though it were wisdom. 1 day at a time. I hung up a little while later. I finished the wine. I went to bed. There is a photograph that appeared in the county paper at the time of the conviction. A photograph of Thomas Weld being led from the courtroom. He is in handcuffs, his hands in front of him. He is wearing the too large suit. He is looking at the floor. I have looked at that photograph many times. I have a version of it saved on my phone that I look at and then delete and then find again, because the news article is still online, and I go back to it and I look. I look at his face, the half of it that's visible since his head is inclined down, and I try to find in it the thing that the jury found, the thing that said guilty man to them, and I cannot find it. What I find in the downward angle of his head, in the contained quality of his posture despite the handcuffs, in the specific stillness of his shoulders, is something that I read as the posture of a person trying to maintain their dignity in a situation where everything around them has become incomprehensible. The posture of someone who knows they are wrongly accused and has no means of demonstrating that, and has decided that the only available response is to not collapse. I know that posture. I have worn it, not in the same circumstances, not with anything like the same stakes. But I know the shape of it. I know what it costs. I kept the article. I thought about what it would take to contact his defense attorney. I thought about what a letter to the attorney would say, what shape it could take, whether there was any way to provide information without identifying myself as the source. I drafted something once, not on paper, in my head, lying awake at 2 a.m., and I ran it through every scenario I could generate, every way it might be traced, every way it might unravel. I drafted it, and I decided it wasn't possible, and I put it away, and I tried to sleep. The post-conviction review that eventually led to his release was about something procedural, discovery material that the prosecution had withheld. I never fully understood the specifics, some document that should have been shared with the defense and wasn't. It was not about the facts of the case. It was not about the alternative theory of the crime. It was a procedural error that created grounds for review, and the review led to release. He was not exonerated. He was released. That distinction matters to me in ways I cannot fully explain, except that the absence of exoneration means the record still exists, means the conviction is still on the record, even if the incarceration has ended, means his 4 years were not officially declared unjust. He is out, but he is not, as far as the state of Pennsylvania is concerned, innocent, and I am the person who knows the truth of it, and I am sitting here telling you because I have no one else, and because the envelope is in the drawer under my sink, and I am awake again at this hour, and something has broken in me. Something has broken. I felt it break. I don't know yet what the breaking means in practical terms. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if the envelope is from Thomas Weld, and I don't know what he wants if it is. I don't know if it's from someone else entirely, someone who has been watching this from a vantage point I haven't imagined. I don't know, but something has broken, and I think I have to tell you the rest of it before I decide anything. I think I have to say the whole thing out loud, wherever that leads. Episode 8. The envelope under my door. 14 days after Thomas Weld was released, the photograph arrived. Before that, in the days between his release and the envelope, I went about my life in the way I have been going about it since October of 3 years ago, which is to say, with great deliberateness, with attention to each task, with the practice of being fully present to whatever is in front of me, because the alternative is to drift into the place where I live with what I know. I went to work, I saw Lupe, I had dinner with Carrie on a Tuesday at a restaurant we like, where we talked about her son's college applications and her mother's hip and a book she was reading that she thought I would like. I listened to Carrie talk, and I watched her face as she talked, and I felt, as I have felt every time I've been with her since Roy died, the weight of the thing I have not told her. I have not told her that her friend's husband died in a garage, that his death came at the end of a confrontation about his treatment of her friend. I have not told her that I was there, adjacent to it, that I made decisions in the aftermath that would have changed everything if I had made them differently. I have not told her. She is the person I would normally tell something like this to. She is the person who has, over 20 years of friendship, been the repository of everything I couldn't hold alone. She is the person who knows about the relationship I had in my 30s that left me unable to trust my own judgment for 2 years. She knows about the time I missed a critical sign in a patient and spent 6 months afterward questioning my competence. She knows the version of me that exists before the controlled exterior, the version that is still surprised by its own fragility. She doesn't know this, and I have not been able to tell her because telling her requires telling her about Roy and Dana and the specific knowledge I had about Dana's arm, and telling her that means asking her what she knew and what she did with what she knew, and I am not certain I am ready for that conversation. I am not certain I am ready for the thing she might say, or the thing she might not say. I am not certain the friendship would survive the full geography of what I know, and what she knows, and what we've been doing with it. I cannot lose Carrie. I cannot add that to the list. So I sat at dinner, and I listened, and I talked about the book she recommended, and I did not say what I was thinking about. Then the envelope arrived. I have been sitting with it for 10 days now. I have taken it out of the drawer 4 times. I have unfolded the paper and read those 5 words, and stood in my bathroom holding it, and each time I put it back. I know you were there. The thing I keep returning to, the specific question I keep circling around, is the question of what they want. Because I know you were there without a subsequent demand, without contact, without any indication of what the person wants to do with what they know. That is not an accusation. It is not a confession prompt. It is not a request for money or for action or for any specific response. It is, I think, a signal. It is someone telling me that the gap I have been living in, the gap between what happened and what the world believes happened, is no longer as private as I thought it was. It is someone telling me that they are there, in the gap, with me. I don't know whether that's threatening or whether it's something else. Whether the envelope is from someone who wants justice or from someone who wants something else entirely, something that doesn't have a clean name. I have considered the possibility that it is Thomas Weld and that what he wants is simply for me to know that he knows. That after 4 years in Haverford Correctional, what he is asking for is not money or even acknowledgement, just for the person who put him there to understand that they did not do it invisibly. I have considered that, and if that's what it is, if the envelope is nothing more than I know and I'm telling you I know, I think I understand that. I think in his position, in his specific circumstances, I would want the same thing. I would want the person to know that their invisibility was not real, that what they thought they got away with, they did not get away with cleanly. You think you were invisible. You weren't. I think about those 4 years. About what 4 years in that place does to a person who is innocent, who knows they are innocent, who knows that somewhere there is a version of events that would explain to everyone what they already know about themselves. 4 years of that. 4 years of maintaining the posture, of not collapsing. I did that to him, not alone, not without context, not without the layered complexity of everything I've described to you, but I did it in the way that matters, in the way that has consequences, in the way that shows up on a record, in the way that 4 years of a man's life were spent on concrete floors rather than wherever he was supposed to be. I did it. I have said that to myself many times. I have said it in the same clinical way that I read a hard prognosis. I did it. I have tried to let the weight of it be real rather than managed. I have not always succeeded. I need to tell you about the last time I saw Eli. This was 3 weeks ago, before the envelope. We had dinner at the house my parents used to own and which I've maintained since our mother moved to the assisted living facility on Route 44. The house is largely empty now. Most of the furniture is gone. The paintings, the accumulated objects of a life lived in one place for 40 years. But the kitchen table is still there. We sat at the kitchen table where we ate every meal of our childhoods, and we ate the food Eli had brought, and we talked. He doesn't look like himself. He hasn't looked like himself in 3 years, but I notice it more acutely in that kitchen, against the context of everything we were before. He is thinner. There are lines around his eyes that weren't there before. He has been, I think, living inside the same thing I have been living inside, carrying it in the way I'm carrying it, except that he is carrying more of it, because what he carries includes the knowledge of what he did in the garage, and I only carry what I did afterward. We ate. We talked about our mother, who is declining in the slow and dignified and terrible way that some people decline. We talked about Eli's work, which is going. He has the business. He has people who work for him and projects in the pipeline and the ordinary mechanics of a life continuing to function. At the end of dinner, as I was washing the dishes and he was drying them, and this is one of the forms of love that exists between people who grew up in the same house, the unconscious division of these tasks, the way neither of us discussed who would wash and who would dry, he said, very quietly, I think about turning myself in. I didn't respond immediately. I finished rinsing the glass I was holding. I said, I know. He said, not as a plan, not like I'm going to do it tomorrow. Just, I think about it. I said, what does thinking about it feel like? He said, like the only thing that would actually make sense. I said, and then? He said, and then I think about what it would do to you. And we finished the dishes, and I drove home, and I have been turning that conversation over ever since. What it would do to me. There is a version of this story in which I am what stands between Eli and the thing he needs to do, in which my survival, my freedom, my license, my career, my life as I have constructed it, is the thing that's keeping the truth in the ground, in which I am, functionally, the obstacle. I do not know what to do with that. I do not know whether he is right to factor me in. I do not know whether I would want him to factor me in if it were the clean abstract of it, with no skin on the question. I think, I am almost certain, that what he wants me to say is, don't think about me, do what you need to do. I think that is what he is waiting for me to say. I haven't said it. Episode 9. What I almost said to Eli. I want to tell you the thing I shouldn't tell you. I've been working up to it. I've been coming at it from all the angles, circling it, laying the context around it, building the scaffolding that I need to stand on to say it. And now I'm standing on it, and I want to tell you, and I also want to stop. I want to stop right here. I want to say this is enough. This is the shape of it. You have enough to understand, and maybe that's all I needed to give you. But, there is a thing I know, a thing that changes the calculus of everything I have told you. A thing that I have not said yet, because saying it changes the story. Not the facts of the story. The facts are what they are, but it changes the moral shape of it. It changes who the narrator of this particular confession actually is. Okay, 3 days after Roy Carver died, 3 days not yet in the full violence of the investigation, Carrie called me. She called me in the afternoon on her lunch break, the way she does sometimes, just to talk, the way we have done for 20 years. And she said, Helen, there's something I need to tell you about Dana. And she told me that on the night Roy died, on the very night, Dana had called her. Not about Roy. She hadn't known about Roy yet. The body hadn't been found until 1:17 a.m., and the identification took hours, and the call to the family came in the early morning. This was earlier. This call was around midnight. Dana had called Carrie at midnight to tell her she had decided to leave Roy. Not that he was dead, not that anything was wrong. To tell her, in the specific way of someone who has finally arrived at a decision after years of delayed arriving, that she was done, that she was going to tell Roy the next day, and she was going to go, and she needed Carrie to know because she needed one person to know, one witness to the decision, so that she couldn't walk it back in the morning. She said this to Carrie at midnight. Roy had been in Eli's garage, already in the garage, already in the condition he was in at midnight. I should tell you what occurred to me when Carrie told me this. I should tell you what shape the thought took, the specific terrible thought that arrived fully formed in the middle of a phone conversation on a Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago. I thought, what if she knew, not that Roy was dead, but that something was happening, that the geography of the night had aligned in a way that she sensed, some animal awareness of the space opening up, the thing she had been waiting for becoming available. What if she called Carrie at midnight to lay her alibi in place, not because she had done anything, but because she understood, at some level she would never be able to articulate, that something was being done for her, that the night was resolving in a way that her decision the next morning would no longer need to survive. I thought that. I immediately tried to unthink it, because it is the thought of someone who has done something terrible and is looking for company in the terrible. And then I thought it again. And then I thought, it doesn't matter. Whatever Dana knew or didn't know, whatever Eli and Dana had or hadn't communicated in the weeks before this, whatever the full architecture of that night was, it doesn't matter to the specific question of Thomas Weld. It doesn't change his innocence. It doesn't change what I did on Route 9, but it matters to me. It matters to the question of what I was protecting when I chose to protect Eli. It matters to whether the thing I was protecting was as simple as I told myself it was. Because here is the thing I almost said to Eli, the thing I have turned over and held back for 3 years. Did you call her? Did you call Donna before I arrived, in the 20 minutes before you called me? Did you tell her? Not what you'd done. I don't think you would have told her what you'd done. But did you call her and say something in the register of it's over, you're free, you can go, not because you planned it that way, not because you went there that night with any intention beyond confrontation, but because afterward, in those 20 minutes, the call was the thing your mind went to, the thing you needed to do. I have never asked him. I will probably never ask him, because the answer might be yes, and I do not know what I would do with that yes. I do not know how to integrate it into the story I have been telling myself, the story in which what I did was terrible and wrong, but was done for the simplest, oldest, most legible reason, to protect my brother, to protect the person I love most in the world from the consequences of an accident that happened inside a larger act of protection, an accident that happened because Eli was trying to defend someone who needed defending. That story is true. It is true, but it might be less complete than I have allowed it to be. And the incomplete version, the version where there was something between Eli and Donna that preceded that night, some understanding or some communication that turned what happened in the garage into something more than the spontaneous escalation I have described, the incomplete version is the one I live with, the one I have chosen not to examine. I am examining it now here with you because the envelope is in the drawer and Thomas Weld is out, and something in me has been breaking for 14 days, and I cannot keep not saying the thing I know. Did Eli call her? I don't know. I might need to ask. Here is what I know about my brother that is not already in this account, that does not fit into the story of someone defending someone else, someone being pushed too far, someone whose worst quality is his commitment to justice, and who went over a line he never meant to cross. He has been in love with Donna Carver for years. I know this. I have known it in the way you know things that no one has said directly to you, but that are so evident in the way someone talks about a person, the specific quality of attention they bring to even a casual mention of a name. I have known it for years, not in a dramatic way, not in the way it happens in stories, the grand passion, the disruption, in the quieter way that real feelings are often held, far back, maintained at a distance, tended like something you cannot use but cannot discard. I don't know what happened between them. I don't know if anything happened between them. I don't know if Donna reciprocated in any form, any direction, even implicitly. I don't have evidence of an affair. I have only the quality of Eli's voice when her name came up, the specific way he paid attention when she was mentioned, the fact that of all the people in Clearwater County who were aware of her situation at home, he was the one who decided to do something about it. Maybe that is love expressing itself as courage. Maybe that is exactly what I have been saying it was, a man deciding that someone he cares about was being hurt, and that he had a responsibility to stop it. Or maybe it's something more entangled than that. Maybe the thing that drove him to Roy that night was not only principle. Maybe the principle and the personal were so wound together by then that he could not have separated them, would not have known how to separate them, had never needed to before. I don't know. I am going to ask him. I am going to ask him after this is done, after I have said everything I came here to say, and I am going to listen to whatever he tells me, and I am going to have to be capable of receiving the answer. I am not certain I am capable of receiving the answer. I am going to try. Episode 10. One consequence I didn't predict. There's a thing they don't tell you about carrying a secret for years. They tell you about the weight of it. They tell you about the way it burdens sleep and corrodes relationships and makes you less available to the people who need you to be fully present. They tell you about the isolation of it, the feeling of being sealed off from the ordinary traffic of human connection by the one thing you cannot say, the thing that sits at the center of every conversation you have like a locked room that no one else can see. They tell you all of that. And it's true. All of it is true. What they don't tell you is that you get used to it, not comfortable with it, not at peace with it, but acclimated the way you acclimate to an altitude or a climate. Your body adjusts, your rhythms reorganize around it. You find the paths that circumvent the locked room without obviously circumventing it, and after enough years you walk those paths without thinking, automatically the way you navigate your own apartment in the dark. You get used to it, and then something happens that you didn't predict. Something small, something that has no right to be the thing that breaks you, given everything else that hasn't broken you, given the verdict and the 4 years and the photograph and the 5 words. I am going to tell you what happened. 8 days ago, 2 days after the envelope arrived, the same period I have been going over and over in the last 48 hours. I was in the break room at work. It was around noon. I was alone, eating a sandwich, looking at nothing in particular, running my mind over the envelope the way I run my mind over everything I can't resolve. A junior nurse came in. Her name is Angie. She's 26. She has been on the floor for 8 months, and she is going to be excellent. She has the right instincts, the right combination of technical precision and something warmer underneath it, and I have been watching her develop with the particular satisfaction I feel when someone is becoming the thing they're supposed to be. She is the age I was when I was becoming the thing I was supposed to be. She came into the break room, and she got something from the refrigerator, and she looked at me and said, "Helen, are you okay?" And I said, "I'm fine." And she looked at me in the way she looks at patients, with that direct, uncluttered attention that is the mark of someone who has not yet learned to be efficient at the expense of actually looking. And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes, I'm sure." And she got her lunch, and she left. And I sat there, and the thing that broke, the thing that finally gave, was not the envelope, and not the 5 words, and not the photograph of Route 9, and not the calculation of Thomas Wells' 4 years. It was the fact that a 26-year-old woman I am responsible for looked at me and asked if I was okay, and I said yes, in the same voice I have been saying yes for 3 years, and she believed me. She looked at me with everything she had, and she believed me, and I am the kind of person who is believed. That is what I have become. That is the thing I built, piece by piece, in the years since October 14th. A person who is believed even when they are lying. A person so practiced at the performance of integrity that it functions even when there is no integrity underneath it. I sat in the break room, and I finished my sandwich, because I cannot waste food. I was trained not to waste food, and then I threw away the wrapper, and I washed my hands at the sink, and I looked at myself in the reflection of the small window above it. I looked at myself, and I thought, who are you? Not a self-pitying thought, not the theatrical self-interrogation of someone asking for the answer they already have. A genuine question asked by someone who is no longer certain of the answer, because I have spent 19 years believing that the thing that made me good at my work was also the thing that made me good. The precision, the steadiness, the willingness to be in hard rooms and not break. I have spent 19 years treating those qualities as virtuous, as the outward expression of something trustworthy and sound at the center. And I went to Eli's house 3 years ago, and I used every single one of those qualities in service of something I cannot fully defend, and I have been using them in service of the cover-up ever since. And they work just as well in the wrong direction as they do in the right one, and I cannot find the seam between the versions of myself that uses them for each. I am the same person, the one who takes care of people, and the one who left a man on the shoulder of a road, the one who teaches Angie what it means to actually look at someone, and the one who tells her she's fine when she asks. The same person, one continuous person. There is no clean cut between them. I am going to contact a lawyer. I have made this decision in the process of telling you this, or I had already made it, and telling you was how I finally heard it clearly. I don't know which one. I am going to contact a lawyer, and I am going to say exactly what I have said here. Not to defend myself, not to construct the best possible case, but to understand what telling the truth would actually mean, what it would cost, what it would give back, whether giving back is even the right frame for it, or whether what I owe Thomas Weld is not something that can be given back, only acknowledged. I am going to ask Eli the question I have been not asking. I am going to do that soon. Before the lawyer, maybe, or after. I don't know the order yet. I am going to take the photograph out of the drawer, and I am going to look at it again. I am going to look at that stretch of Route 9 and let it be what it is, the place where I made the choice, the place where the timeline of several lives bent in a direction that I chose. And I am going to decide what someone who genuinely believes in accountability owes to a situation like this one. I don't know the answer. I want to be honest about that. I have presented myself to you as someone who knows things, who is trained to know, who has spent decades in rooms where knowing is survival, and in this specific matter I do not know. I know what happened, I know what I did. I do not know what I owe for it. I think I have to find out. I should tell you the last thing, the thing I said I would tell you, the consequence I did not predict. I told you the envelope had a photograph and 5 words. I told you I know you were there. I have been sitting with those words as the primary fact of my current situation, the pressure point, the thing that tells me someone outside myself has knowledge of what I did. But yesterday, which is the reason I am telling you all of this now, today, this particular morning, yesterday I received a second envelope, not under the door this time, in the mailbox. Which means either the first one being under the door was deliberate, chosen specifically to signal that the sender has access to my building, that they have been inside, or the second one being in the mailbox means they've decided the point was made and normal delivery is sufficient now. I don't know which reading is right. The second envelope had my name on it in the same block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, again in block letters, just 3 words this time. 3 words. And the 3 words were not an accusation or a demand or a threat. They were a question. Did he survive? Did he survive? Not I know what you did. Not you should turn yourself in. Not I want money, or I want justice, or I want anything you might be able to name and respond to. Did he survive? And I stood in my hallway with this envelope, with this question, and I understood, for the first time in 3 years, something I had not understood before. This is not Thomas Weld. Thomas Weld knows whether Roy Carver survived. The whole county knows. The trial made it national news for 48 hours. Roy's death is public record. This is someone who did not know the outcome, someone who was not following the case, someone who has been carrying their own piece of this story in their own locked room for 3 years, and who either did not know Roy died or needed to confirm it, needed to hear it from someone else, someone who was there. Did he survive? I stood in my hallway and I counted, the way I count. The way I count everything. Who else was on Route 9 that night? Who else has been living in a gap? Who else has been carrying a piece of the geography of October 14th and not knowing what to do with it? There is someone else. There is someone else who knows. And they are not asking for anything yet, except the answer to one question. And I am standing here in my hallway, and I have read the 3 words 6 times, and I have put the paper back in the envelope and taken it out again, and the answer is simple and factual, and I know it completely and precisely, and I cannot decide whether giving it, saying it out loud, or writing it down, closing the loop between what this person carries and what they are asking, is the beginning of something or the end of it. No, I want to tell them. He did not survive. Roy Carver died at 4:44 a.m. at County General. He died on a table. He died with a team of strangers working to keep him in the world. He did not survive. And I stood there in my hallway, and I felt something shift in me that I did not choose and could not stop and could not fully name. The shift of understanding that the thing I have been most afraid of, someone knowing, someone asking, someone bringing the outside world into the space where I have been living alone with this, is already here, has been here possibly longer than I knew, has been waiting for me to be ready. I'm not ready.
I'm going to answer anyway.